right in the middle. It's horrible. It's better than at night, though. Teaching at night's the worst. I used to do it. Can't do it anymore. After 5 o'clock, my brain doesn't work anymore. I'm getting old. I don't want to know. After 5 o'clock, I don't want to know anything. Ugh. It's okay. It's no big deal. 2 minutes. Night classes are the worst. Those were invented by the devil, man. This is okay. I can tolerate this, but it's still bad. It's gotta be. You have to go. You have to study in the morning. That's the way it is. What am I doing? Right. Okay. Are there any questions for me? Eight students withdrew. That's typical. I told you at the beginning. That's nothing. It's typical. Some of you are still going to fail the course. It's because you're not listening. Whoever does fail it is just not listening. You know what I mean? I don't know since when, but they withdrew. I just looked. College isn't for everyone. Nothing is for everyone. Yes, Egon.
Professor, I think you might have talked about it, but my internet was coming in and out last class. As far as the essay, how do we submit that?
On Blackboard, I think the 10th.
It's going to be available on Blackboard, and we input it into Blackboard.
Yeah, let me just double check.
If we do it as a file, does it have to be PDF, Word? What do you?
No, don't just. If you can avoid attachments, avoid attachments. Let's see. Essay will be available after June 10th, 8 in the morning. So I think you have June 10th until the 12th or something to submit it.
Okay.
On Blackboard. 13th is due. Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, Natalia.
You mentioned avoid attachment. So you want to paste all essay to the main plot, to the main area?
You know what? I beg your pardon. How is it usually done? How do you guys? Because I don't know. How do you usually do it?
Usually you browse your file and you attach and then submit. But you can do other, so I can copy and paste whole essay to the not subject, entry part, so it depends on you.
No, I'm flexible. If you guys and gals usually attach it and the professor can have access to it and there's no problem, attach it. That's fine.
It's appeared, so it's the attachment will appear under submission immediately, so it's going to be visible.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you for clarification.
Okay, here we are. Are there any other questions? Okay, good. So we now know the history of the legalization of abortion in the United States. Yes, Natalia, question? Okay. Um, we now know the history of the legalization of abortion in the United States. I think you're in a position to have a rational, knowledgeable conversation with someone about this matter. Yes, Christian.
How are we supposed to? How do you want us to write the essay, like in MLA form or APA?
No, just follow my instructions in the syllabus, and you'll be fine.
Okay.
It doesn't specify whether you wanted MLA or APA. However, I think you said in one of the first classes that it was up to our discretion whether we use MLA or APA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not so concerned about the style as much as the content. Yeah. MLA is fine. Right. So we know about the history of the legalization of abortion, and that cannot be controversial in the sense we use in the sense in which we use controversial in logic, meaning those are facts, right? It is a fact that the Supreme Court, right, voted in favor of Roe. It's the fact that this happened. It is a fact that that happened. So none of it is really controversial, right? It's just history. History is not, well, history, I guess history can be controversial. Some people might debate on whether some event took place or not. That's fine. But in this case, it was so recent. It's recent. We don't know what happened. So those are facts. And then we reviewed that. You got the final exam questions on the history of the legalization of abortion in the United States. And after we did that, we went into Judith Jarvis Thompson. And I'm reviewing right now. Thompson is pro-choice. However, in her paper, she starts out outlining the pro-life argument. She calls it the standard argument against abortion in the case of rape. And once again, this is it right here. This is what we looked at last time, if I'm not mistaken, when I was really sick and dying. Feeling better, thank God. Anyways, we looked at this, and the first thing we did was to ask the question, does the conclusion follow from the premises? Now listen very carefully. I don't want any of you to forget any of this. I don't want any of you to forget any of this. I don't want you to forget the principles that you're learning. Okay? It's okay if you don't care about abortion, right? That's not your issue. Right? Some people dedicate their lives for this cause or for that cause, right? Maybe you don't care so much about abortion. You just care more about world poverty or something like that, or what have you. That's fine. You can forget about abortion. That's fine. It need not be interesting to you. But the principles we use, okay, the logic we use, the critical thinking skills, I don't want you to forget those ever, ever, ever. I implore you, I beseech you, I supplicate. Okay, so the first thing we did when we looked at this is well, the first thing you do when you come across a paragraph like this, whether it's in English, Spanish, Greek, or Russian, the first thing you do is you ask yourself, if it's an argument, of course, does the conclusion follow from the premises, right? Well, in order to do that, you need to symbolize, right? But before you symbolize, you need to do something called formalization, which we did. When you formalize, you keep the English language. You're not writing P's and Q's, not yet. There are no arrows. There are no upside down A's or universal quantifiers. When you formalize an argument, one thing you do, for example, is you enumerate the premises. That's something you do. But you still keep the sentences in their original natural language, right? So if I were to formalize this, I would write, number one, all persons have a right to life. Number two, the fetus is a person. Number three, the right to life of the fetus, since it is a person, trumps the woman's right to choose what happens in and to her body, even in the case of rape. 4, if the fetus has a right to life and its right to life trumps the woman's rights, even in the case of rape, then it is not the case that abortion is moral. Therefore, it is not the case that abortion is moral. So I would keep the English language and just write 1 through 4. Why? Well, because it makes discussion on the argument easier. Suppose this is my argument, and you don't agree with a particular line. You could easily say, I don't agree with 3. It's much easier, much faster to say, I don't agree with 3, than it is to say, the right to life of the fetus, since it is a person, trumps the woman's right to choose what happens in and to her body, even in the case of rape. Too long. So, yeah, when you're reading something I guess there are some newspapers left somewhere. When you're reading something in a newspaper, and it's an argument, you might have to do that, right? You go in there and you enumerate the premises. Something else you do you get rid of unnecessary language, right? So suppose this argument started out like this. Listen, man, all persons have a right to life. Do you know what I mean, right? Sometimes people use unnecessary language. It's common, nothing wrong with it. It's just that we don't need it. Right? Again, this first sentence here could have begun, listen, man, comma, all persons have a right to life. You don't need listen, man, comma. You get rid of it. It's not part of the rational structure. Suppose I say line 2, right? Of course, the fetus is a person. You don't need of course. You don't need it. Suppose in the original it said the right to life of the fetus, since it is a person, trumps the woman's right to choose what happens in and to her body, even in the case of rape, comma, such a horrible thing. You know, rape is a horrible thing. Of course it is. We don't need it though. We don't need it. So, yeah, I'll put that in the chat section. When you come across an argument, formalize it. Formalize it first. When you formalize it,
jamón en el coso donde están los tomates. Okay. Y un pedazo de queso.
You enumerate the premises. And get rid of unnecessary language. Oops. Among other things. You keep the English. You keep the language in its original. You keep it in its original language. You just tidy it up a bit. What else do you do when you formalize? You get rid of unnecessary language. You also try to say the same things in the same way. Right? Okay. So suppose that in this argument it said in one line, the right to life of the fetus trumps. And on another line, it said the right to life of the fetus outweighs. Don't do that. Use one word. Choose one word and stick to that one word. In logic, we like repetition. Language has to be consistent. Suppose I say, I went to the nation's capital yesterday. Washington, D.C. is really beautiful. Don't do that. Either call it the nation's capital throughout the whole freaking argument. Nation's capital, nation's capital, nation's capital, nation. Or Washington, D.C. But don't use two different terms or expressions. I didn't go into formalization too much in this course. I might say a few more other things. But in my post, let's look at it. Where am I? That's not it. There it is. In my post, you can see it in the announcements section. In section 2, okay, in lecture notes 3, section 2, it says toward a formalization of the argument against abortion, even in the case of rape. And you'll see that it's just enumerated. And yeah, for line 1, you want to write universal quantifications in this way. For every x, if x, blah, blah, blah. When you formalize, you want to do that. I think I do it. Yeah, you have to do it at the formalization stage because you're not going to keep the English when you symbolize. And I don't symbolize it in the handout. I just formalize it. does roughly, does the difference between formalization and symbolization make some sense? Yes? Okay. Then once it's formalized, you can symbolize it. Now, we did this last time. I can do it again. I'll do it quickly. If anyone wants to see it done again, it's valuable. Yes? Okay. Okay, sure. Yeah, because it's... Let me see. Okay. So, yeah. You can also ask, you know. You can also ask, entonces, what am I doing? All right, okay. So, well, first of all, do you have, let's go back. Oh my God. Do you have a picture of the argument? In the ordinary English, do you have it? You know, I'll go back and take a picture of it. Then we can work off the picture. And again, I entreat you to commit all of this to memory. There it is. Okay, so I'll give you a minute to take a picture of this. If you haven't, take a picture of this damn thing here. Okay, we've taken the picture. Do we have the picture? Okay, good. I won't say it ever again. I promise. I won't repeat myself ever again. This is the last time I say this, but it's just so important. If you're gonna be an astronomer and you're gonna argue for something, you're gonna need to use logic, right? That's what we're doing here. So pay attention. It's not just about abortion, right? It could be astronomy, botany, anything. This is widely applicable. Logic is widely applicable. Okay, I won't repeat that ever again. Right. Okay, so you got your picture. Now we got the whiteboard. Okay, so I'm going to skip the formalization process. I shouldn't do it, but I think it's kind of commonsensical, right? I'll go directly to the symbolization. And it looks like this. So the I'll just use it. The first premise looks like this. It is worth repeating, you know. It's worth repeating. All persons have a right to life for every X. If X is a person, then X has a right to life. Is that true? Is that false? We don't care at this stage. Suppose you're talking to an evil dictator. He says, we must invade Poland, or we must invade Czech Republic, we must annex Austria, whatever. Initially, you have to be objective and just read what is being said as objectively as you can argue against it later. Initially, you just want to clear it up so you understand exactly what is being advanced. We all have disagreements and agreements. We know that. You have to. This is an assumption. It's called a universal quantification. And you know this because we've gone over this a million times. The second premise is the fetus is a person, and that's written like this. If you don't know how to do this, that's fine. That's why we're doing it again. The second premise doesn't say if A, then B. There's no conditional there, there's no arrow, there's no hypothetical. It's just an affirmation. London is the capital of England. That's not a conditional. The fetus is a person. That's an affirmation. So you don't use an arrow. It could be false, it could be true, but you just don't use an arrow. That's also an assumption. What do we call it? I don't know. Affirmation. Número 3. Right to life of the fetus, since it is a person, trumps the woman's right to choose what happens in and to her body, even in the case of rape. That sounds controversial. I don't agree. Fine, but just wait. Hold your horses. Let's symbolize it first. So what it's saying essentially that the fetus has more rights because it's a person, or the fetus' right to life is just more is weightier than the woman's right to choose what happens in and to her body. Notice they're not saying the woman has no rights. They're not saying that. They're just saying one way is more than the other. And at this point, you can be imaginative. How do I, symbolize this? Well, I use a scale. But you could use a square. As long as it reminds you. You could use a triangle. But scale really reminds you, right? So, what is it? Blackboard. I know it's wrong to hate, but it's okay to hate Blackboard. It's okay. As long as the hate is pure. Let's see here. There's the scale. Alrighty then. And it's also an assumption. You have some leeway sometimes. You could come up with your own symbol. Don't forget, this is shorthand, people. It's just shorthand. I told you, my mother was a secretary, among other things. And she used shorthand. It's something like shorthand. Número 4. If the fetus has a right to life. Number 4 is going to be a conditional because it starts with if. When you see that if, arrow time. When you see that if, it's arrow time. There are some things you can do. You have some leeway. Not absolute. There are certain things, though, that you cannot do. There are some restrictions. Some restrictions apply. If the fetus has a right to life, it's going to look like this. And the right to life outweighs, right? Then it is not the case that abortion is moral. Now, in logic, as in mathematics, once we have more than two terms, in this case we have three, we start using parentheses. And we put them here. If you put them elsewhere, you have a problem. You put them there because abortion is immoral on the ground, just in case those two conditions are given together. And the conclusion is not the case that abortion is moral. Now, many of you saw this last time. Many of you observed or perceived that the language on the board tracks the ordinary English. Are we seeing that today? Do we see that the blue symbols on the board accurately represent the, yeah, oh, Jennifer. Good. Let's see. Very good. That's very good. That's all I asked for. And bribes. No, just kidding. No bribes. Gold. Gold bars. I'm very immoral. Don't tell the dean. No, rhodium. I want rhodium. I think an ounce of gold right now is at $1,857. An ounce of gold. $1,857. I think that an ounce of rhodium is at like 12,000 maybe. It's crazy. They use it in catalytic converters. Platinum too. Precious metals. Are there any questions on the symbolization here? Okay, let me know. Don't be shy. Because you might suck at logic, but be a great violinist, right? You might suck at logic, but be amazing at something else. It's okay. All right, so the question we ask now is, how do we get there from here? How do we get to, no, not yet. Not a bad, the first thing you want to do when you have a universal quantification anywhere, here it's on line 1, it could have been on line 2, 3, 4, wherever. The first thing you want to do is get rid of that quantification. Right. That's the first thing you want to do. The quantification is useless as it is. It's useless. You can't use it. You need to convert it. If you have 20 lines and on line 14 you have a quantification, deal with that thing first. Get rid of it. If you have 20 lines on line 10, you have a quantification, get rid of it. Instantiate right away. Convert it. It's useless. If you have 20 lines on line 4, you have a quantification, get rid of it. How do you get rid of it? You instantiate. So, you give an example. Line 1 says, for every X, if X is a person, then X has a right to life. In other words, all persons have a right to life. So you could say, for example, if a crocodile is a person, then a crocodile has a right to life. You could do that. You could do that. Line 1 says, for every X, if X is a person, then X has a right to life. What follows then is that, well, if a dolphin is a person, then the dolphin has a right to. That does follow. You could do it. You could logically do it. You could derive an infinite number of instantiations. But we want to derive something that's going to help us, that's going to be relevant. If your friends are talking about one thing and then you start talking about another thing, there's no coherence. We're talking about feet. If you look at line 2, it's an argument about fetuses. So let's try plugging in fetuses. You could plug in dolphin, you could plug in tree, but you plug in fetus. And you don't write therefore here, because the therefore is reserved for the final conclusion. When you use modus ponens by itself, universal instantiation by itself, you can use the 3 dots. But when you have a long argument, you're going to save those 3 dots for the final conclusion. So I'm going to write. I'm going to think therefore, and I'm going to write. If the fetus is a person, then the fetus has a right to life. From one universal instantiation. Whenever you have a quantification, a universal quantification, get rid of it. How do you do that? By instantiating. You're not going to be asked to do something like this on the final exam. On the final exam, I might ask you, what's involved in the symbolization, right, of the standard argument against abortion? What's involved? Oh, right, there's a universal instantiation in the proof. They're much easier. The lecture's a bit harder. Just a bit. Well, if you know modus ponens and you look at lines 5 and 2, RF follows. If you look at lines 5 and 2, you can get RF. Let's try that. Let's pull it. And I know we did this last time, but it's a good thing you're not here because I'm spitting all over the place. I know we did this last time, but it's a little tricky. Now the conclusion says not A. It is not the case that A. What could take me to it is not the case that A?
Sí.
Anyone?
Y qué, otra vez. Y si ese yo fue bizcocho de una y le llamas a ti, pero es que yo no sé qué tanta
I drank all that coffee.
¿Cómo es? Y dijo, échale pan con huevos, a cada huevo, a cada cantidad de huevos, y tanto maicena.
What could take me to the conclusion? By I guess you mean the scale, right, Denise? Right. Very good. Yeah, if you say, well, how can I get to not A? Well, open your eyes, right? Is there any indication on line 1? No. Does line 2 say anything about not A? Nope. What about 3? Nope. Right. Yes, Gabriela. Line 4 tells you right there. If you got these two joined, then you get not A. It's right there. So let's join them. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. The leaf blowers were outside earlier. Enemies of humanity. You know those leaf blowers are nuclear powered, right? They're nuclear powered. I saw this guy with a leaf blower. You could hear him like half a mile away. Just pushing one leaf, man. Pushing one leaf. Get out of here. Yeah. Just pick up the leaf. And they stay there for like an hour. For some reason, the leaf wasn't moving. Okay, so, yeah, it could be. Yeah. So we get the conclusion from 4 and 7 modus ponens. You might say, no, it's modus tollens. There's a negation. Negations don't necessarily mean that you have modus tollens. You have modus tollens when you negate the second part. But the second part here was not negated. It was already negated. That's how it came out of the factory. And the first part is affirmed, line 7, and the consequent is just identical to the consequent in line 4 as modus ponens. Are there any questions? Excuse me, still sick. Are there any questions? Was this better? Is this good? Yeah? Okay, so the argument is valid. The whole damn thing is valid. You can only determine this if you use logic, right? Right. So, I'm going to erase this right now. I'll give you 30 seconds.
comer y ellos vienen. Y cuando no hay nada de comida, me esperan.
Okay, it's gone. The argument is valid. But as I told you many times, it doesn't mean we accept the argument. It's got something going for it, but we're not done. What do we do? Now we look at the assumptions. How many were there? 4. That's what we do first. That is what we do first. Next. Look at the assumptions. The argument is valid, but it has it definitely has a controversial assumption, which is line 2. The fetus is a person is controversial. How the hell does anyone know that a fetus is a person? Controversial. Could it be a person? Yes. I'm open-minded. Everyone should be open-minded. But we just don't know. Right? Does God exist? Maybe. But you shouldn't put that in an assumption. So the fetus is a person is controversial. Since it's controversial, the argument is unsound. And that's why we reject it. However, Thompson doesn't focus on assumption 2. She focuses on assumption 3. The right to life of the fetus, since it outweighs the right that the woman has to choose, since the fetus is a person. Wait, I got that backwards. The right to life of the fetus, since it is a person. The right to life of the fetus, since it is a person, outweighs the woman's right to choose what happens in and to her body. That's the one that she's going to attack. And according to Thompson, if you accept this premise or this assumption, then you would have to accept a ridiculous assumption. If you accept that the fetus, since it's a person, has more rights than the woman has to choose what happens in and to her body, then you would have to remain connected to an ailing violinist, because after all, he too is a person. And his rights to life outweigh your right to choose what happens in and to your body. In the second line, she says, surely this is outrageous, right? Since when do we live in a world in which people must remain connected to ailing violinists? Therefore, she concludes by way of modus tollens, it is not the case that the fetus, since it is a person, has a right to life that outweighs the woman's right to choose what happens in and to her body. That's Thompson's argument. And of course, one criticism against Thompson now would be to say, you're wrong, Thompson. Since the ailing violinist is a famous violinist, a famous musician that makes the majority happy, then utilitarians would claim that one must remain connected to the ailing or sick musician for 9 months or what have you, and that is the utilitarian objection against Thompson. And I think that's where we stopped. I just reviewed everything. Are there any questions on Thompson's attack on the third premise here, or any questions on the utilitarian objection to Thompson's modus tollens argument? Anyone? No? Okay. Excuse me. Carolyn Borroto, can you hear me?
Yes.
Are you having problems with the internet?
Yes, I am, because my power went, it went out and then it came back up now.
Okay. Let's see. This is something you should always do. When you come across an argument, first formalize, then symbolize. Well, first you ask the question, right? Does the conclusion follow? Then you formalize. Then you symbolize. Then you try to prove it or disprove it. And if the argument is valid because it's deductive or strong because it's inductive, then check for soundness by reading the assumptions. Are they acceptable or controversial? If one or more assumptions are controversial, even if it's only one, the argument is unsound. Okay, now I want you to work together. You can cheat by working together. You can use the chat section. Is this argument valid? Is this argument valid? A critical thinking exercise using all the principles or most of the principles that you have learned. Let's see what it says. All communists are advocates for the elimination of private property. Hitler was a communist. Japan and Italy shared Germany's political views during World War II. If Hitler was an advocate for the elimination of private property, and Japan and Italy shared Germany's political views during World War II, then the Axis powers were communist. Therefore, the Axis powers were communist. Is this valid? Does the conclusion follow? I'll give you a few minutes to look at it. You can work together. Now, I'll be putting some clues in the, I don't want to say too much, so you're kind of lucky. You're not going to hear me for a while. We're a relief, right? So, of course, first, we must formalize. Right? Of course, first we must formalize this. This means, enumerate the premises, turn off your damn cell phone, right? Get used to looking at this argument for an hour or two. There's no speed reading here. There's no escape. Okay? Think of yourself as a surgeon going in there, analyzing everything with a steady hand. So first we must formalize. This means enumerate the premises. If there's unnecessary language, get rid of it. But to be honest with you, I wouldn't worry too much about formalizing this argument because it's pretty tidy as it is. I would formalize it in that I would enumerate the premises, but I wouldn't worry too much about making sure the language is consistent. It is consistent. Afterwards, next, sorry. I'll symbolize. Again, you can help each other. You can use the chat section to help each other. How does that look on the whiteboard? Is that better or worse? Is that better or worse? It's better.
Better.
Now, you know what I'm going to do? You know what I'm going to do? Look at line 3. It says Japan and Italy shared Germany's political views during World War II. I'm going to get rid of during World War II. I don't need it. I know Japan and Italy shared Germany's political views during World War II, but I don't need during World War II. So I'm going to go in there. What did I just do? Okay. So you see, sometimes less is better. There's less clutter. All communists are advocate for the elimination of private property. I think that's fine. Okay, so this is the formalization of the argument. We didn't have to do too much because it was tidy from the get-go. The argument was pretty tidy from the get-go. So we didn't do too much, but we did We did a lot. I mean, we did something. And our next step is going to be to symbolize it. It's break time. So let's take 20 minutes. I'll see you at 3 after.